My perception has changed in the sense that it's much broader. This idea of looking at safety as being proactive, about the presence of safety being something different than that absence of harm, is a real interesting and challenging concept. But I think when you go back then to teams and start talking to teams about this, what's really interesting is the passion that frontline people have about providing safe care. They're not thinking about harm with respects to data that's being provided, in reports. And what they're doing is they're coming into work on a day-to-day basis and wanting to do the best possible thing for their patient that day. And this framework enables people to think in those terms. So it's not looking at a chart and then trying to think back to what happened 6 months ago or 2 months ago. This is truly about, I have a patient that I'm providing care for today. How can I do that in the best way, the safest way for that patient? And that's a game changer for many people. And the idea then that they're being supported in that is really incredibly important to frontline people.
It's been for me a real growth experience. To come into the beginning of the demonstration project 3 years ago now, and thinking we understood the measurement and monitoring of safety framework and could teach it, we clearly had a long way to go. And what we learned in the process was we can't leave people to flounder. We have to follow them quickly into their sites and teach again and teach again. So we found, specifically for me, I found that if I taught their teams 3 times, those teams would succeed. They would hear it and embed it, and it would become a way of thinking differently about safety. So that was a big learning experience for me, and possibly for all of us, the importance of that.
My biggest attributes as a coach would be being comfortable with the framework, having that self-confidence to get in front of a group of people and talk to them about safety. But probably the biggest attribute would be my passion for this work. How using my experience and what I've learned from the teams and be able to take that and share those experiences and share those stories with other teams across the country. We were kind of the glue that held all of the teams together, so we could learn something from one team and then we could share that story and that experience through our storytelling and through presentations to the other teams when we went to visit them at the sites or when we were on the phone and doing coaching calls. Another piece is just that pure accountability. The teams will tell us just because they knew we were going to be calling them or because they knew we were coming for a site visit, being accountable to us kind of spurred them into action. They knew they had to do something. And this idea of reassuring the teams, I think, is the other big piece, where they would say, we haven't really done that much. But as you start to talk to them and you listen to what they're saying and how they're just naturally starting to embed this thinking into their day-to-day work, being there to let them know that you are actually doing good work. You're actually starting to think differently about safety, and I can hear it in your conversations.
So it's very interesting to see how people approach this and how they move along in their journey. And people would like for us to give them a recipe for how to do this and how to get to the different place in that journey. And what we've learned over time is that everybody arrives there but on a different path, right? They end up getting there, and people have different aha moments along that journey. Sometimes people get it very quickly, and sometimes it takes a while. Work that we've done with Dr. Julia Moore has really helped with our understanding about behavioral change. And I think some of that work we've been able to integrate into our teaching with the teams. But this idea that, knowledge is just part of it, but it really is dependent upon the environment that they're working within. So, having that support where we've saw really kind of strong movement, I think at times, has been in organizations where senior leaders have been actively kind of interested, involved. They're not necessarily, day to day, but teams know that they're supported. And then teams that really kind of work at trying to understand frontline staff desires and wishes and trying to find that motivation for helping teams move forward has been really important in that behavioral change.
I think that that concept became very clear after we'd completed the first demonstration project, through our learning of how we discovered in that process how difficult it was, how it was deceptively simple, the model of it, but in the application it was very difficult. And once we had learned how difficult it was, we were cautious, we were careful, and we learned with the support of each other. We went out together on this to learn from each other when we went to site visits. But we would make sure that we would repeat, support, and repeat again to always try and answer their questions, find people who could answer the questions. I relied heavily on Wayne and Anne to help guide me as a coach. And I think we would give each other feedback. And I think that made it helpful as we were working on this variability of simple application to hard to back down to a more simple. But I think Anne mentioned that you go slowly to learn, and we had to teach ourselves that also. So until they come to their aha moment, and to watch them reach that aha, was really almost miraculous. It was so fun to see that happen.
Some of the light bulb moments that I watched, I'd say the biggest one is this realization that the absence of harm is not the equivalent to the presence of safety. And many, many examples of that. And I'd say coming out of the very first learning session, teams were grappling with what this is, but they knew they were leaving with this idea that the absence of harm is not the equivalent to presence of safety. But really then how do you start to create that presence of safety? And it was absolutely remarkable to see the variety, the creativity, the innovation that came from the different teams as they worked to create safety inside their structure, their unit, their team.
Keeping this work moving forward, I think it's part of this bigger picture of, we're 15 years into an approach to patient safety, and we knew we needed to kind of shift gears. And I think this offers that hope of moving it to the next kind of level where people are thinking beyond just doing incident management and beyond kind of just looking at harm. I think that this really kind of beckons back to this idea that leadership is really important, staff are really important, the relationships that occur between leaders, staff, and patients, and that whole environment is really critical to creating that kind of place where people get safe and effective care. We have spent an enormous amount of time looking at efficiencies in our system, and that's important. I mean, lots of organizations have many stresses, but at the end of the day, from a patient perspective, providing safe and effective care is what's most important. And I think this offers a bit of hope for that. And it's going to take some time. You don't create, we didn't get to the place we're to now with quality improvement approaches overnight. This is going to take some time. And it's going to take time to build it out, to build the expertise, to build the resources, the capacity within the system. But I think it is one of the things that we're bringing to the table right now that can really help us think, 5-10 years out. where we would like to be as a system. And I think we need to have that long-term vision as an organization. Our goal here is to be able to sit back in a decade, in 7 years' time, decade, and be able to say things are fundamentally different. That's what we should be. That should be our goal.
My proudest moment, actually, that's not a difficult answer to find. And when we heard from our teams in the demonstration project at the final learning session, where every team, without exception and without prompting from us, all said, this has changed the culture on our unit. And we sat there and were almost in tears. It was so wonderful to hear how meaningful, how important this initiative had been. And we are getting the same sense from the presentations that we are hearing from the next 11 teams that have gone through phase 2 of measurement and monitoring of safety, an 18-month collaborative that has, to these people that have worked with us and we with them, has made a huge difference to their culture as well. And they are very worried about how to move forward. That's a sense I'm getting from our teams. Let's not lose this. It's too important, and how do we spread this within our organization and beyond the bricks and mortar to other sites, through the regions, through the province, and across the country.
My message to people watching this video is that everybody has a role to play in safety, whether it's their own safe care, the safe care of their loved one. Everybody has a role to play. We all can tap into each other's wisdom and work towards that common goal of creating safe care for all.
For me, one of the comments would be that the importance for the teams that have been able to incorporate the patient voice and work towards that, you reach at a different level of richness. It really fundamentally helps change how people perceive what they're doing and elevate it to a level of they want to try new things and different things. And it's not always easy for teams to find a way to capture that. But for the teams that have been able to incorporate that, I think it ends up being a different experience and a better experience. So being able to help teams with that, I think is an area that would be an area of continued growth, I think, continued kind of support for teams.
This idea that we are working with the teams and with patients to bridge that gap between what safe care is, recognizing that as providers, how we define safe care and what safe care means to us is very different than what patients, families, and residents perceive safe care is. And through this work, we're doing a remarkable job of bridging that gap, promoting those really, really valuable conversations around what safe care looks like, and harnessing and tapping into that wisdom and the willingness of patients, residents, and families to create safe care, to help keep their loved ones safe and themselves safe.
And when talking about bridging the gap, I think one thing we have observed is when you spread this within staff, but include everybody from the housekeeping staff to the senior leaders, you get different perspective of safety, different aha moments, and it's invaluable conversation that they have with the patients, with the families, and with all levels of staff. It makes a huge difference, and everyone learns from everyone.
Yeah, and I think you'll hear us use the words conversation and share, things like that, and that's very different than teach and meetings.
Yeah.
And it really challenges people. The comfortable thing is to go into a meeting and have an agenda item. It's very different to create a forum where people can start talking about safety on the unit as opposed to in the locker room as they're leaving. And that is sort of where we need to get to. We need to get this out and have the frank conversations. And then if people can see that they can safely raise an issue and they're going to have some support in raising it, they're more likely to participate. But if people just feel, why raise this? We've talked about this a dozen times before. It's not going anywhere. And that kind of an environment just leads for things to be shut down and controlled, and just, you get into this idea of just, showing people that everything is good, but we know that that's not the case.